So Steve, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you to say a couple of words about summer and what we're going to be talking about today, and off we go.
Sure. Once again, thank you for having me today. This is a really exciting opportunity. I had the opportunity a few years ago to meet Dr. Smith in doing some work out in California. And we've been talking, as you know, for a long, long time in the field of family engagement about the disengaged and what strategies, what ideas we learn from research, what research tells us about why families are disengaged, and then looking at the strategies and ideas that we might implement to try to reverse that disengagement. And of course, one of the subgroups, if you will, of families that can provide a challenge with engagement are migrant families. And when I met Summer, it was immediately apparent to me that not only did she have a depth and breadth of research knowledge and background knowledge and understanding why things are the way they are and what needs to happen in order to change them, she also had just an arsenal of ideas and strategies and knowledge, and was very successful in engaging migrant families in her district. And so I would love to say that I have the depth of knowledge in migrant family engagement that Dr. Smith has. That is not true. I know a little bit about that, but she is a true expert. And so it's a thrill to have her here today. It's very exciting. And so Summer, thank you for being here. And I love this, migrant education starts with families. So tell us a little bit about that and take it away.
So thank you, Steve. I think it's really important that when we're working with migrant families, and in my 10 years of serving as the Senior Director of Migrant Education in the largest region in California, we really quickly learned that in order to engage our students, we needed to start with our families, and that outreach to our families was essential, and that outreach needed to be much more than the superficial outreach that we often see happen, that it needed to be really targeted, in-depth, and strategic. In order to get our students where we needed them, we needed to have our families on board with us. We know that currently there's over 300,000 migrant students in the United States. And so this is a meaningful group that adds to the work and the success of our schools. So a question that often comes up is, why is it so challenging to reach migrant families? I think it's really important that when we think about migrant families, we think about the root of what it means to be migrant. Our families are moving consistently from area to area and often don't have an opportunity to really set down roots and engage in the culture of what it means to be part of a school system. On top of that, there's real safety concerns for many of our migrant students and families as they enter a new area, getting to know the people, who's safe, who's not, where do they have access. Many of our students don't attend school. They don't attend school either because a family's only going to be in a place for a very short period of time. Maybe they're moving during the summer months and schools are not in session. We also have an entire population of out-of-school youth, which are those students who are moving for work, who may also be parents themselves. And so we know that accessing our out-of-school youth population is really challenging. They could be here on an H-2A visa, which limits our access to them because they may be living in areas that we can't get into where the growers have put them or are providing housing. And that also many of our students, unfortunately, we have the highest dropout rate with our migrant students. And so we know that students are entering our system and leaving before we've had the opportunity to engage our families. And so more than any other population, we know that we need to be strategic and purposeful and quick in our response to engaging migrant families. It seems odd to a lot of people, but many migrant families don't know that they're eligible for migrant education services. There's a real misconception of what migrant means. In the news, we hear the word migrant and immigrant used interchangeably. Families that qualify for migrant education services are those that work in forestry, fishery, or agriculture who make a qualifying move, meaning they move from district to district, state to state, across cities in order to gain work in those areas. And so because oftentimes office staff within a school system or a school system itself doesn't know the regulations of migrant education, or maybe aren't versed in working with migrant education or migrant students and families, families go unidentified. And when families go unidentified, they also go unengaged. And so we see that when families aren't engaged, when migrant families aren't engaged, that we have a loss of opportunity to serve our migrant students in a meaningful way. So I was able to, as Steve shared a little bit early on, as I looked at our family engagement plans, both within our state service delivery and our local district service agreements and our regional service agreements, I realized that something was missing. And I had been using Steve's text within my university courses that I teach for several years. And I knew that there was a bridge. I knew that the principles outlined in the 5 simple principles were a foundation for what I needed to do, but in a slightly different way, really understanding the needs of migrant families. And so I was able to work with Steve to really look at what we were doing well and where those challenges were and how we could implement the 5 simple principles with the needs of migrant families. And through the opportunity to use my own region as a laboratory, we were able to tweak the strategies and look at how we could implement those to engage our families, and we're really successful at that process. And so over the last many years, working both here locally as well as several migrant regions throughout the United States, we've been really able to see the success that we can have for migrant families, but overall for migrant students when we implement the 5 simple principles. So what's really important when we look at each of these principles, one principle that area of a principle that stands out to most with migrant families is the idea of invisible engagement. And really this idea that there's so much engagement that's occurring with our families outside of what we see in the school system. And this isn't true, I don't know of, for any other group more so than for our migrant families. Migrant families often aren't seen at family reading nights or family math nights. They may not show up to an open house, but the amount of work that's happening in the home to encourage education for students is that's often not measured. And so really tapping into the resource of invisible engagement and acknowledging the amount of engagement that happens for our students within the home is a key to engaging with our migrant families, giving them credit for the work that's happening outside of our site. And we talk a lot in my work with other migrant regions across California about how we maximize invisible engagement and how we measure its effectiveness. One strategy that's been really successful across the board is the idea of onboarding families and not just our students. So oftentimes when a new family arrives and is qualified for migrant education services, we orient the student to the services that are being offered. We're a student service, supplemental student service program. And so our focus is on students. When we report our services in Migrant Ed, we're reporting student services. We often forget the invaluable resource that families hold in being able to access those students. And so through an onboarding process of bringing parents in, taking them through your school site, looking for those obstacles and challenges that prevent them from engaging, areas that you may not even think of. One of the areas that we look at is the signage that's around. What keeps families from coming in? Do they have to present identification before they enter the office space? Do they have to go through a security guard? And what does that say to a family that already has fears around safety and access? And so through onboarding, you have the opportunity to really take migrant parents through a process of coming into that school setting and feeling comfortable, introducing them to key staff, introducing key staff to them, showing them where the resources are so that they're not searching for them on their own. Identifying, we talk a lot about doing asset mapping. We talk a lot about looking at a map of what's available there and taking images to show families to say, this sign that says, you know, only enter during these hours means this within this process. And so really helping parents to feel like they're wanted and to feel like they can overcome any of those obstacles or challenges that may be before them to engage within that school system. Another really important strategy that we discuss in our work together is around pre-teaching about programs. So often families are invited to events that take place on a school site. And going back to our previous discussion about invisible engagement, it's really important, again, that we're keeping in mind that you're not going to measure engagement of migrant families through a sign-in sheet. It's just not going to happen. You're not going to be able to measure your success by counting how many families showed up to something. However, it is important to offer that opportunity to families, and we want to see migrant families take advantage of those on-site opportunities. And what we know is that as a migrant education program, in order to be supplemental, we have an opportunity to prepare families for what's to come. And that often means to pre-teach what's about to happen in the general program. So for example, you know that parent-teacher conferences are coming up for a school district or for a school site. As a migrant education program, it's really important that we bring families in and pre-teach them about what that process will look like. Prepare them to ask questions, prepare them for what they're going to hear, review the report card with them, talk about where they're going to meet the teacher. We know that when we pre-teach families about what's to come, their affective filters come down and they're more likely to show up. We've seen this in family nights. To hold a migrant science night before the district science night, where you're able to show families what they're going to do so that they're prepared. No parent wants to show up and sit next to their student at family math and not be able to do the math that's put before them. So when we're able to pre-teach, we're able to fully engage our families, and then that supports our general programs in being able to engage families as well in the services they offer. At the end of these events, meetings, parent nights, school activities, migrant activity, it's really important for families that we give them an opportunity to come back together and debrief. And not just debrief with those who showed up, but debrief with those who didn't. So a lot of our time around family engagement is making those phone calls, not with judgment, but to say, hey, we really missed you at that whatever event. A, how can I get you the information? It was important. And B, what could we do better next time to assure that you can be there, right? And that really helps us to identify where we missed the mark, right? If families aren't participating, it's not the family's fault. So one of the activities I often do with my team is to debrief an event without any blame towards a family or a student. We can't say families had to work. We can't say families didn't have transportation. We can only talk about what we did or what we missed. And we do the same thing with our families. We bring them together, we debrief. We don't talk about themselves. We talk or about us as a program. We talk about themselves. What were those pieces that were there that would have gotten you to where we needed to be? Or what could we have provided to you so that you could have learned the content in another way? And I can't stress number 5 enough. It's really important that you're educating your teams and staff around what it means to engage migrant families. And the first piece of that education starts with involvement is an engagement, to quote Steve himself. So just because a family shows up doesn't mean they're engaged. We've seen so many migrant families that show up to an event, but then that learning isn't passed down or implemented outside of that space. And so when we educate our teams around what it means to engage migrant families, we educate them around what it means to have efficacy in what we're doing with migrant families, to take our learning beyond what's on our plan or beyond what's happening on our site, and taking that engagement to mean that our families have implemented the learning that we've given to them or that we've put out there, and that we're seeing that that's happening by the success of our students. So again, we measure our family engagement not by the sign-in sheet, but by the results that are happening with our students. And in migrant ed, that's amplified in, again, that we're only reporting the services and the outcomes for our students. We don't report the services or the outcomes to our families other than a narrative form. So we know that what gets measured gets funded. And as a supplemental program, we're measuring the success of our students. And in order to improve the success of our migrant students, we need to fully engage our migrant parents. So we need to educate our teams around the obstacles and challenges towards engagement. And we need to, again, I'll reiterate, remind them that with migrant families, engagement means that the activities, the services, the learning is happening, even if we can't see it, right?
So this is great, Summer. Thank you. It's really important that we talk about this stuff. I also think, and I think the reason a lot of us are on this call today is because we know talk is really just the first step in a process. If we want to reach these families truly, if we want to change behavior or perception in a school district to truly engage these underrepresented groups, we need to think about not only what we need to do, but create a plan to do that, implement it, and make sure that's sustainable. So let's talk a little bit about what's next. What are some things that we can do to continue this work so that we can dive a little bit deeper and make it really meaningful and sustainable in our districts? I'm going to ask Steve to come on and talk a little bit about a program that we have coming up that I think really could benefit you, your teams, and your districts as we go forward and thinking about how to do this work and make it sustainable and make it meaningful in our communities and to our parents and students.
Sure. Corey, before I do that, you probably saw me taking some notes. I always learn something. Every time I listen to Summer, there's always like, oh, that's a good idea. And it struck me as she was talking, and I apologize if I looked down and was just scribbling some notes, that you could really, before we get into what's next, we could really look at this umbrella of changing a culture of an organization. She talked about invisible engagement that you don't see, but you can see the results of. She mentioned the importance of education to migrant families. It's extremely important that their children get a good education. We also know that families are the first and most influential teachers of their children. Well, you string those three things together, you begin to see a pathway forward in understanding how we might remodel or reshape or rethink our culture and family engagement. She mentioned, the families feeling comfortable, signage, little things, and we tend sometimes to make assumptions. We make assumptions that because we've sent a letter home, that everybody understood it, that we put up a sign, that everybody knows what it means. And when we think about those assumptions, it kind of takes me right back to culture, because assumptions and attitudes are certainly important pieces of culture as well. And then the whole notion about not judging a family for not attendance, or if the family didn't do what we wanted them to do, to simply call and reiterate how important we think they are and how much we would still love to work with them. Again, no judgment, no where were you, why didn't you come, but just say, I'm sorry you couldn't be there, still want to give this information to you. It takes me back again to the culture that engages every family. And then lastly, her last point was measurement. How do you know anything happened? If you put all of this effort into engaging families, how do you look at and measure and see what successes we've had? And her process, as she told you at the beginning, does follow the 5 simple principles logic model. It's the information that we share with all the folks that we work with in terms of understanding a very important point. And that is that family engagement is a process. What Dr. Smith outlined for you today is a bit of a process. This comes before this, and this comes before this. And if we do those things with fidelity, we see results. We have the opportunity, and this is just thrilling to me, we have the opportunity to present to you a national cohort and working group on this very topic, the 5 simple principles for engaging migrant families. There are going to be 9 90-minute sessions, all virtual. You'll have the opportunity to work directly with Dr. Prather-Smith and learn, even go deeper. Today was a I review a treetop flyover. There's so much information under each one of these categories. And I promise you, Dr. Smith is an expert in this area and can speak to research, can speak to strategy, can speak to planning, can speak to experience. I'm always interested in people who have done the hard yards, as my Australian friends say, people who have actually done the work, seen the results, and can help others see those very same results. So if this is of interest to you, and there are migrant children all over the United States, we hope that you'll consider joining this really important cohort experience with Dr. Smith. You see a QR code on your screen. Just take a screenshot of that real quickly and sign up. And there's just a wealth of information here, and it takes an area that we do find challenges in and goes deep enough so that we can begin to see results, resolve those challenges, understand how to resolve those challenges, understand what it's going to take to do that, and then actually see positive results in the process. So I certainly would encourage you to attend this cohort. This information is extremely valuable, and I feel extremely fortunate that we can offer this.
Well, thank you, Steve, and thank you again, Summer. It's been a great presentation. So happy to have you here and sharing in this work. Looking forward and hoping that people will take advantage of learning a little bit more about the National Cohort and Working Group. If you guys do have questions as you scan that QR code and go to that landing page, you should feel free to reach out to us at info@rocketpd.com, and someone on our team will get back to you and answer any questions that you might have to make sure that you're included in this work and have an opportunity to learn a little bit more with Dr. Smith. And really appreciate all of you being here to learn a little bit about this. Again, we are available if you have questions, and hope to see you again real soon. Thanks a lot. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.